Today, we're returning to the Caledonia Works stable once again, and this time, our subject is an obscure pre-grouping tender engine from the London and North Western Railway, namely the Greater Britain class. I've used this locomotive for brief cameo appearances in several videos now, so I thought it was about time she got a review of her own. But first, a brief history on the real thing. The Greater Britain class was designed by Francis Webb in the early 1890s, with only 10 examples built at Crewe Works between 1891 and 1894. These three-cylinder compound locomotives were intended for express passenger work on the West Coast Main Line, and came equipped with an unusual divided drive arrangement. In this case, the inside low-pressure cylinder drove the leading driving axle, while the two outside high-pressure cylinders drove the trailing axle. Because of this arrangement, the Greater Britain is technically a 2-2-2-2 despite looking like a conventional 2-4-2 at first glance. Besides the divided drive, another strange aspect of this locomotive is the nameplates, which were split with one word over each wheel splasher. As for the numbering, this was all over the place, in typical LNWR tradition. The first member of the class to be built was number 2525 Greater Britain, and her classmates included, but were not limited to, 3435 Queen Empress, 2052 Prince George, 527 Henry Bessemer, and 772 Richard Trevithick. As for why the numbers were all over the place, I'm pretty sure it's because the LNWR did this strange thing where they gave new engines reused numbers from previously withdrawn locomotives, and the engines just ended up with the earliest available numbers. The Greater Britain locomotives were quite short-lived, as they didn't last too much longer in service after Webb's retirement in 1903. His successor, George Whale, preferred less complicated locomotives, and the first Greater Britain to be scrapped was number 528 Richard Moon, going in March 1906. The final survivor of this class was number 2051 George Findlay, and he wasn't scrapped until July 1907. Sadly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, none of these curious locomotives have survived into preservation, and the class has kind of faded into obscurity over the years. Indeed, I don't recall ever hearing of them myself until they were announced as coming to TS. The LNWR Greater Britain class was released for TS Classic in June 2020, and the pack is still available on CW's website for a full price of £13, or around 28 New Zealand dollars. That's a little cheaper than normal, and I dare say it's due to the smaller amount of included content, especially when compared to the LMS Patriot and LSWR N15. These two cost £20 each at full price. In any case, you only get 3 liveries with the Greater Britain, all from the LNWR era because none of these engines survived long enough to see the grouping in 1923, let alone British Railways. The liveries you get are Blackberry Black, Royal Scarlet for 2525 Greater Britain, and Royal Cream and Lavender for 3435 Queen Empress. I'll say this much about the two royal liveries: they don't half stick out like a sore thumb. And to be honest, until I started making this review, I completely forgot that the royal liveries even existed. This locomotive uses the Locomotion 1.3 scripting by SimNation, and the features include, but are not limited to, numerous cab camera views, accurate LNWR lamps, high-resolution textures, animated inside valve gear, animated brake rigging, and of course, performance mode. This is a staple feature of CW products, and it helps people with lower-end computers by switching off point lights, such as the firebox glow. This feature is toggled on and off by pressing Shift-P. Despite having 3 cylinders, The Greater Britain doesn't sound like a more conventional 3-cylinder locomotive. Case in point, the LNWR A3 class. Instead of having 6 exhaust shafts per wheel rotation, the LNWR engine only has 2. This is due to her being a compound, with the exhaust from the 2 high-pressure cylinders being funneled into the single low-pressure cylinder. The end result of this arrangement is a locomotive that sounds like she's travelling only half as fast as she actually is. A manual is included with this add-on, and it provides more details on the features, keyboard controls, and advice for when you're driving the locomotive. Indeed, I find her much easier to drive than the Caledonia Railway 956 class, which was the subject of a previous review. An important thing to remember when driving the Greater Britain is to keep the fire mass between 55 and 65% and the water level between 70 and 90%, as marked on the F4 heads-up display. You should open the cylinder drains when you're stopped for a long time, so as to rid the cylinders of any steam that may have condensed back to water. Curiously, this thing even has a functioning water scoop, lowered by pressing T and raised by pressing Shift T. As impressive as this is, I'm not sure why it's implemented because, aside from the Riviera line in the 50s, I can't think of any other steam-era routes that feature working water troughs. As I have often seen with CW products, the Greater Britain class doesn't come with any scenarios. However, she does have quick drive consists, and these require the old freeware LNWR 50-foot coaches that you could get from UK Train Sim years ago. Although UKTS is now gone, the coaches, and lots of other content that was on the site, are still available to download on the Internet Archive. I usually just set up free roam scenarios when I want to drive the Greater Britain, and I often get her running with the coaches from Matrix Trains' LNWR Carriage Set 1, which you can buy from Steam Sound Supreme. At the end of the day, I would go so far as to say that the Greater Britain is one of my favourite locomotives from the CW collection, alongside the likes of the Northeastern Railway Raven A2 and Caledonian Railway 600 class. With her good looks and decent performance, this bizarre 2222 tender engine is ideal for anyone who likes the more obscure locomotives, and, in this case, elaborate liveries too, or just wants to potter about with a moderately powerful engine and a short to medium length passenger train. I give the LNWR Greater Britain class a 7 out of 10.